It's time for Shop Talk in this episode of AEA Amplified.
From the Aircraft Electronics Association, this is AEA Amplified, a podcast for aviation's technology experts, with your host, Jeff Hill.
Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of AEA Amplified, sponsored by our good friends at Aviation Design and Supply, also known as ADS. Dive into a world where avionics repair stations thrive thanks to ADS's cutting-edge solutions. From GFC autopilot installation hardware kits and custom avionics engineering packages to the revolutionary AMI work management software, ADS is transforming the landscape of repair station efficiency and profitability. To learn more, head over to aviationdesignandsupply.com. I'm your host, Jeff Hill, and today is June 18th, 2024. Summer is heating up in North America, and today we continue on with our Shop Talk series with another round of regulatory topics where we aim to provide answers to some frequently asked questions from AEA members. And we're joined once again by AirSense Avionics President Brian Yablon, who founded his repair station back in 2018, and he's located in Scappoose, Oregon. We are also joined, of course, by Mr. Rick Peri, who is the AEA Vice President of Government and Industry Affairs. And gentlemen, I know you both have a lot of ground to cover on some important topics that I'm sure that all repair station owners and managers are going to want to better understand. So let's just jump right into the conversation, and I'll turn it over to Brian to get us started with the first question. Brian, take it away.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Rick, and thanks for having us on again. Rick, I've been in business now for a couple of years. We've been working with a repair station manual that I designed very much without any understanding of what was going to be involved when I actually picked up a wrench and started working on an airplane. And I'm finding that many of the policies and procedures which I established for me and for my business may or may not be applicable. Certainly, I probably overdid it with respect to levels of detail in my record keeping. And I've got some questions about record keeping and what is regulatorily required, what the FAA wants to see, what I need to do for my business, and overall how to streamline the procedures that I've put in place so that I can better, right size my record keeping burden to my business. Because as you can imagine, we spend an inordinate amount of time keeping records on everything that we do. And to the extent that I can spend more time working on aircraft and less time working on paperwork, that would definitely improve my bottom line. So, with that little intro, what are the record keeping requirements when I'm working on an aircraft? What do I need to do as a repair station?
Well, that's a heck of an intro. The first thing is that you know how to set me up by telling me that you're embracing the continuous improvement of your manual and your processes, which is, as you know from having listened to it a couple of times, foundational in the repair station training program, in that your manuals are never static. They're always under continuous improvement. And so from that perspective, right off the bat, we're already starting on a good stage for this one. But, when you talk about record keeping, you really have a couple of things. One is what the regulations require and what your FAA would like to see should be the same. So let's not worry about PIP, if you will, principal inspector's personal preferences. They have a job to ask questions. We have a job to answer those questions. We have the responsibility of showing compliance to the regulations. They have the job of finding compliance to the regulations. They find compliance based on our ability to show. And when we don't show adequately, they make recommendations on how we could show better to simplify their job of finding easier. Okay, but you raise the issue, and you've got arguably three different categories of records. We have the basic requirement for maintenance, which applies to every person performing maintenance at every level, regardless if they're an independent mechanic, a repair station, or an air carrier. They all have that same basic requirement to record maintenance.
That's the Part
Then
43 stuff.
it's Part 43 stuff, and it carries over into 145 in 145-219. But that's the 43 stuff. And then we have the repair station records. And then, the regulations aren't designed to make you profitable. The regulations are designed to make you arguably safe or airworthy. And so the third set of records you have to keep are the business records. All right. And so to be an efficient business, and to be an efficient business that has a certified facility as well as performing aircraft maintenance, you really have to check all three boxes. And the more efficiently you check all three boxes, the more successful the business is.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So if I'm just, so Part 43 requires me to record maintenance that's performed on aircraft and inspections that I do on aircraft. That would be sort of the bare minimum that I would necessarily record, right? But as a business, I'm also recording things like who did the work, how many hours they spent doing the work, specific notes about the work, so that I can, for instance, transfer work from one employee to another if someone's going to be out of the shop for a couple of days and we have to maintain continuity over the job. That's pretty much where I'd like to be right now. I think I overdid it in my repair station manuals by requiring all kinds of records on in progress inspections and pre-closeout inspections, and it's just overly burdensome. So is there anything there that you would suggest I might be able to dispense with, or maybe other things where I would want to augment from your experience, in working in this industry?
Yeah, so I think that you have maintenance records. And as you said, the maintenance records are 43. And, 43.9 is the record of maintenance. And effectively, the repair station is performing the work, and the repair station is returning it to service. And so because of that, some of the redundancy in the 43.9 record of who's performing the work, and if that person is different than the return to service, it seems as if that's not required, but we do have that within our travelers in 145 to satisfy that requirement. Okay. And so you do within the 145 have the traveler, which identifies every person who has worked on that airplane or who's been responsible for the task. Usually it may be a lead or supervisor or in your case, in a small shop, it's the individual technician who's completing a task, and you have a traveler that documents that. So that part of it is pretty solid. Okay. You do a 100% second inspection, the second set of eyes on the task. Kind of looks like an in-progress inspection, although it isn't actually required by the maintenance manual. But having said that, there are a number of tasks that in an avionics industry in particular, that second set of eyes is really valuable. for safety reasons. Okay, we have too many accidents by misrigged flight controls. We're doing autopilots, we're doing autopilot work, we're doing integration work, and so the idea of having a second set of eyes before we close the panel makes a lot of sense. Now, from a regulatory perspective, both in 43.9 as well as in 145, we have the responsibility for the final inspection and the approval for return to service. If you're doing a task that cannot be inspected by a final inspection, then an in-progress inspection makes good sense.
And would be required, I guess, right?
It's actually not required per se, okay? Generally, in-progress inspections that are required aren't actually in the avionics realm for the most part. They're in engines and transmissions and things where you may have torques and safety wire and stuff like that that's actually inside the component, that there's physically no way to tell if you safety wired it correctly without disassembling it again, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you'd have an in-progress inspection. On the avionics side of things, for the most part, most basic radio installations and stuff you can inspect post-task, okay? Flight controls where you're closing up a panel probably could use a second set of eyes. An antenna installation that gets covered up by upholstery would be a good one to have a second set of eyes to make sure that, you know, the doubler's correct and that the you know, attachments are correct, and you know, the metal has been cleaned properly, so you have good continuity. So it's that type of things, but every business is different. A lot of the larger repair stations actually have a defined policy that talks about in-progress inspections that are established by the business. And generally, like I said, they're critical steps. They're flight control related. They're, if you would, almost aligned to what the airlines in 135 would have as a required inspection item, an RII item, where you're dealing with a critical system and you've identified those critical systems, and those are the ones that you have a second set of eyes to. When you do that, it does elevate the bar because the person who does the in-progress inspection has to be qualified to do a final inspection also. So it's not just any person, okay?
Okay, so for the in-progress inspections, as long as someone is more experienced in the shop who's done that work, they can probably do an in-progress inspection. But if it's a flight critical thing, then you kind of have to have someone who's certificated by the repair station, right?
Right. So you wouldn't call it in progress because that generates its own baggage, okay?
Yeah.
So if you have a second set of eyes, that would be an inspector. They would be on your roster as an inspector. But if you have a in-progress inspection, that actually requires a certificated person that has return to service authority.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, if I have documentation, let's say I'm following an STC installation manual, and they call out certain things like, you know, bonding resistance needs to be less than so and so milliohms, or tension on the cable needs to be, you know, so many pounds. We're obviously going to make a measurement and assure that we're complying to the STC, the approved data. Do we have to record that anywhere, or is it just, no, as long as you get it done and you're following the STC, it's good?
Well, again, you know, the aircraft records, and in this case, the traveler, okay, is used to show compliance to the maintenance requirements. Okay.
Yeah.
You can't show compliance to that which is not recorded.
Makes perfect sense. Okay. So yes, if the STC calls for something, we should be notating it that
Right.
that value was measured or that procedure was done or whatever.
And whatever your traveler documentation is where you put that information, right? And part of it is that whether you're showing it to the agency, you're showing it to the customer, or you're showing it to an investigator down the road, you want to be able to show that you did the job correctly.
Right, right. Makes sense. How about differences between work that's performed for Part 135 operators as opposed to Part 91 operators or Part 121 operators, if we ever get into that kind of thing?
Well, if it isn't challenging enough, there's actually two 135s, and the heavy 135, the 10 seats or more, and 121 are functionally the same. And so, for the sake of argument, you have the 9 or less 135, or commercial operations 10 or more, if you will, which includes arguably 121. Now, in the repair station regulations, we have a requirement that when we are working for a commercial operator, we have to follow their approved maintenance program. So right off the bat, if you have a commercial customer, if it's 9 or less in a 135, they generally would be following Part 91, just as a normal general aviation aircraft would. However, they can have an approved maintenance program. If they have an approved maintenance program, then as a repair station, and arguably even as an independent A&P, we are required to follow their maintenance program. And they will tell you how to document work. They will tell you what kind of tracking is required. They will tell you what kind of parts can be used. Their maintenance program will basically tell you how you're supposed to operate. And so you can take your process, put it on the shelves. You have to follow their process.
Okay, all right, that makes sense. And you brought
That's
up
why
parts. Go ahead.
that's why I always caution people that, especially when you start getting into heavy 135, every individual customer could have their own program, and that means that you have this massive human factor setup. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and I've helped a few shops that got sideways because of that, where they thought an airplane was under commercial operations, it was under 91. They thought it was under 91, it was under commercial operations, and it goes back and forth. And so when you get into the heavy aircraft, that's why it takes a larger facility with larger staffing, because the administrative burden for that maintenance is just that much bigger. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, if you do cater to 135, in your work order that you generate with the customer, you want to ask them if they're a 135 operator. Okay. And if they are a 135 operator, you want to ask them if they have an approved maintenance program.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, a 172 that's under a 135 could have an approved maintenance program.
Right, makes perfect sense. Flight schools, for instance, they may be doing some 135 stuff, right? If they run air taxi, but generally that's Part 91.
Well, yeah, or I think 141.
141.
If they're a certified flight school.
Yeah. Any maintenance differences to worry about there?
No.
Okay. All right. So I
Other
was
than
going to
the 100-hour inspection, but other than that,
right,
no.
right. So you mentioned parts before, and that's a sore spot for us, because maintaining traceability on parts seems to be sort of unclear for everybody. In fact, the last shop talk that Jeremy Ham had a couple of guests on who ran their own repair stations, and there seemed to be some uncertainty even among them about what records are required for maintaining traceability. One of the shops said, well, we do this, and the FAA hasn't really bugged us about it. And the other shop said, yep, we kind of do this, and our inspector seems fine with it. That's not comforting for guys with an engineering background who like, everything to be explicit. So my understanding was that you need to maintain traceability for parts all the way back to the mine where the ore was originally mined from. But that's not my responsibility, right? That would be, as long as there's a traceability path, right, a chain through the vendors, then that's probably sufficient for the FAA, right?
I could have swore that we reprogrammed the engineer out of you when you took the 145 course. Okay.
Yeah.
So 145 is generally a pretty good rule, but there are some mistakes in it. And one of them happens to do with receiving inspections. Okay. Prior to 2001, we actually did a receiving inspection of everything that came into the facility. And in 2001, as part of the rulemaking, the 1997 rulemaking, the FAA, and if I understand it correctly, it's actually FAA legal, kind of said that it was redundant, and they added the word raw materials into the incoming inspection. And so the regulation actually, as it's written, says you have to have an incoming inspection of raw materials. That's, first of all, as a business, that's a bad limitation. You want to do a receiving inspection of everything you receive. Okay. I do it when I, receive packages from, our dear friends at Amazon, right? It comes in, I open it up, make sure it's what I ordered, make sure that it's packaged, it's not damaged, etc. And so, all businesses do a receiving inspection, differing degrees, but they all do it. The requirement of a receiving inspection is traceability. Okay. And in Advisory Circular 20-154, which is the FAA's guide for developing a receiving inspection. Now, this is a US, obviously an FAA requirement. For anybody who follows an FAA type system, this advisory circular is really good. On the EASA side, it's actually embedded in 145 itself. Okay, so it's generally the same. And traceability is the ability to establish that a part or material was manufactured under 21 or were previously determined to be airworthy under 43. Now, that's great, except there's actually one more element to that, and that is that it was approved under 43 also. Okay, so I can install parts that may not have pedigree, but they were legitimately conformed and installed in the aircraft, and they're legal also. To do that, we've got here in the US particularly, we have a very broad ability to do that. We can determine traceability through shipping tickets, invoices, parts marking like PMA or TSO, the data plates, the serial numbers, manufacturing production numbers, and then on the continued airworthiness side, maintenance records and work orders, etc. And so if we go to this AC and we look at how to show traceability, this is what we want to put into our repair station manual in our quality system on how we show traceability. Okay. Now, having said that, how long do you need to keep these records? Which I think is the second part of your question. Okay. There are varying philosophies out there. And if you have a very robust system, now clearly if I'm installing an aviation part into an aircraft, I am going to pass through the traceability documents to the customer. Okay. Now, I wouldn't be doing shipping invoices and stuff like that, but if I have an 8130 or if I have a CFC or something, that'll pass to the customer because the customer is the one that's required to show airworthiness, not actually us.
And do they
Okay.
actually care? I mean, most customers are happy that I have the 8130. They don't want it.
And that's fine. And that's fine. But if you're doing that, you're now storing it on behalf of the customer.
Okay.
Okay. And keeping in mind that you only have a 2-year requirement for documentation that shows compliance to Part 43, right? And so this traceability is a 43 requirement, arguably. And so that would be a 219 requirement, which only requires 2 years. And so depending on how you retain documents, you may not have the document when the customer wants it. And that's
Okay.
why it's good to have both of you to keep a copy. You keep a copy to show compliance to 43, which is required, but you give them a copy so they can show airworthiness until they want to get rid of it.
Well, look, I'm an aircraft owner also, and I can tell you that when I purchased my airplane, I did not get comprehensive records with traceability on all the nuts and bolts that went into the airplane in the form of maintenance over the years, nor for that matter on the avionics the pathetic avionics that I bought that airplane with. So, to what extent does an owner really need to maintain those records?
So the interesting part of that is that there's actually a regulation for that, 91-417, and it not only addresses what records are required, and when we look at 43.9, the requirements as a mechanic to do 43.9 is somewhat aligned with the customer's requirements under 91-417, which is, a description of the work, the date it was completed, and the person that approved it for return to service. But when you look at the rest of the requirements, there's actually a section here talks about the retention of records. And to your point, no, those records are not required to be retained. Okay. Most of that work is only required to be retained for a year before it can be disposed of as well.
Okay. Okay. So really the airplane's legal. There's nothing wrong if he doesn't have an 8130 on every, whatever.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Now, as far as my requirement to maintain traceability, go ahead.
Brian, there's another piece to this. Okay. So we're talking about aircraft parts. All right. What most FAA raise an issue about is actually standard parts. Okay. And if your FAA inspector came from a large organization or the military, they quite often have 100% traceability to the aircraft, okay? Which is functionally debilitating for a small business.
Oh,
all
for
right.
sure.
But there's a risk in not doing that. And it's a risk that you're assuming. And arguably, it's a risk that you need to be aware of. So, years ago, when we were using mil-spec hardware, there was a QPL, Qualified Products List. And essentially, the Defense Logistics Agency would qualify certain manufacturers to produce mil-spec hardware and to sell mil-spec hardware. And so when we bought nuts, bolts, 8L clamps, etc., they were quality products, and there was a quality system involved with that. Fast forward, now because of the Technology Transfer Act, many of these standards are now in the public domain. And because they're in the public domain, you don't have that quality oversight that you used to have. And as a result of that, we're seeing SUPS reports on the quality of hardware. So if in fact you're doing an installation and you're putting hardware in there, and 6 months, 12 months, 18 months later, you get a SUPS report about a lot number of material that somewhere in your records it said that you did in fact get it, all right? Now you have to do a risk assessment to determine whether or not you're going to recall every job that you've done that would have likely used this part since the date that that lot number was delivered to you. Okay. And so on the one extreme, you have 100% traceability to standard parts. On the other hand, you have just acceptance of the risk. But I would suggest that there's actually an intermediate area. And that's where you have positive opening and closure of lot numbers. Okay. So you know what date you opened a bag of screws, and you completely exhausted that bag of screws before you opened the next bag, and you recorded both dates.
And that's exactly what we do. We record the dates, but we know that when we're picking from a particular lot number, we know that we're grabbing from that lot, and then when that lot is exhausted, we go back to deep stock and we replenish from that lot or maybe a different lot. But we don't mix lots ever in our parts.
And that's what you want to do, and that's a good thing. Now, if you're doing, and I know that you're an avionics shop, but let's say that you were doing critical components, okay? Engine mounts, right? Wing mounts, things like that. Those things are critical enough that if those bolts were recalled, you would want that aircraft to be inspected before flown, right?
Sure.
And so if you're doing anything that is super critical, safety critical, then you would want to record that lot number in those items. But you want to set that procedure so your technicians know that.
Right. Yeah, and we have software that actually does that automatically for us. It maintains the traceability. Let me just pull on that traceability thread a little bit. To what extent do I have to maintain the full traceability back to the manufacturer versus is it sufficient for me to maintain traceability to the vendor from whom I purchased the parts and that vendor's number, or do I have to go farther back than that?
You need to have traceability to that part being an aviation part. Okay. Now, if it's a standard part, traceability to the vendor is all you need. Okay. If it's an aircraft part, if it's a TSO, PMA, T-seed part, then you need traceability to that capabilities. Okay. But again, if you use the advisory circular, okay, you could have a shipping document that shows the vendor that you received it from, and you could have the parts marking itself that shows that it has a TSO or PMA marking to it, and it has a legitimate data plate. That's all you need.
So what about parts that I get from an aviation junkyard? You know, a lot of these parts, the manufacturer's been out of business, the part's not available, or it costs $10,000, and you need I don't know, like some widget from the inside of the wing, a bell crank or whatever. So you call up your friendly junkyard guy, and he pulls it out and sends it to you, and it looks just like the part, but there are no markings, there are no part numbers. Can I use that, or no, there's no traceability, so forget about it?
So with the scenario that you just said, no, I can't use it. Okay.
Okay, interesting.
Because I have no traceability. Now, if I had traceability of, from a person who's authorized, okay, so I'm a mechanic, that this part was removed from, XYZ airplane, all right, so it came from an airplane. I have traceability to the airplane it was taken from, and there is parts marking on it so I can identify the part, all right, not just form, fit, and function, but actually identify the part. Then I can perform maintenance on it and approve it for return to service.
As a mechanic, though, can I visibly inspect the part and determine airworthiness?
Absolutely.
Okay, so
That's the,
even if it doesn't have a marking on it.
if you can identify it as the right part, okay, and keeping in mind that simply because it looks right isn't defendable, all right,
Okay,
okay. But if as a mechanic, you've ordered it from a known source, it's come with traceability to the source, the part is identifiable, okay, then I need to do a maintenance action on the part to be able to install it in another aircraft. And that maintenance action is an inspection.
okay. So unless I had, if I do get, well, let me back up. If I'm installing something like a defroster vent on a Comanche, okay, that would probably be less critical from an airframe integrity standpoint than, a bell crank, right?
Sure.
So I would be more stringent with the bell crank, or does it the same standards have to apply to both parts because they're both airplane parts?
Arguably, they apply the same.
Okay. All right. So we have to be careful about that because,
Absolutely.
yeah, I
And
know.
and in today's eBay world, I can buy anything on the internet, and that's how a lot of bogus parts end up in the marketplace. Not necessarily from the more established online sellers per se, but the people that access those will sell things that, you know, have the form, fit, and function, but, come from left field.
Sure. I do get a lot of customers that will bring used avionics to me to install for them. Um, Sometimes those parts come from eBay, and the only pedigree that's available is the data plate that's on the part. Oftentimes, it's an indicator of something that will have a data plate. Should I be insisting that these parts come from somebody that could provide an 8130 or at least a yellow tag? And are those two equivalent anyway, or does it really matter?
So the 8130 is not a required form. It's a preferred form. Many of the air carrier customers do require it as part of your contract, as part of their maintenance program. So it depends on the customer in that case. Arguably, from a GA perspective, a yellow tag and 8130 are arguably the same. Okay. However, the yellow tag is actually a maintenance release under 43.9. That's what it is. Now, the issue becomes you, as the installer, are determining the airworthiness of that item. Okay. So you need to perform a maintenance action on it to determine that, in fact, it functions properly. And most shops today don't have that bench capability, in which case the only way I would install it is if, in fact, I sent it to one of the shops to do a inspection and conformity and ops check and give me an airworthiness determination, because I'm not capable of doing that in my shop. I would argue, and I'm going off memory, I don't think you're rated to do instrument maintenance.
That's correct.
Okay, so if you're not rated to do instrument maintenance, you're not rated to determine the airworthiness of the instrument by itself.
Yeah, but I can determine whether it functions properly by installing it in the aircraft, and before I sign the aircraft off, I can functionally check it using a line, a flight line test set, and if it works, then we're good, right?
No,
Okay.
no,
All right.
that's the whole point.
Okay.
So you're using the aircraft as a test set, but you're still determining this widget that the customer brought you, is functioning properly. So you're doing an inspection and evaluation of this instrument. Now, as a mechanic, I can install instruments all day long, but I can only install airworthy instruments to sign off the aircraft. Okay, I don't have the ability to well, I do as a mechanic. I can inspect it, but I can't repair it, right? But in the repair station, you don't have any maintenance authority beyond 411-413. And as a result of that, when a customer brings you that instrument, it's just a paperweight until somebody determines that that instrument is airworthy. And you don't have that ability within your authority.
Okay. That brings up an interesting question then. Let's say customer A comes into my shop and has a fully functional panel with modern enough avionics, but individual indicators. Wants all that stuff removed, wants to put in fancy new avionics. We do that. And then he tells me, sell those instruments on consignment to somebody else. Okay, let's say one of the instruments was a GI 106A or B indicator. I got another customer who comes in. I removed that instrument from a functioning instrument from an aircraft. I have a new customer, customer B, who wants that indicator. You're saying, nope, unless I ship that off to a shop that can determine that that's an airworthy component, I can't reinstall it. Is that accurate?
No.
Okay.
Maybe. Okay. Well, so when you removed it, did you verify its operation?
Sure.
Did you remove an operational instrument?
Sure.
Okay. So now you know that it worked when it was removed. You have traceability to the aircraft. You can reinstall it, okay, in another aircraft.
Okay.
However, in your customer bringing you something with no pedigree, no traceability, you don't know. Now
And
it
it's
becomes
not
a different
appropriate for me to
scenario.
make that determination
Right.
with a flight line. Okay, that's good to know. That's good to know. So I should insist now that any customer is bringing me instruments to install in their aircraft, those instruments need to come from a reputable source with a yellow tag or an 8130.
Or you need to ship it off to a reputable source to have it inspected and tested.
Okay. All right. That's good to know. All right. As far as 8130s go, once the 8130 is for the instrument as it leaves the shop, right? Once we get the 8130 and we open the box, all bets are off, right? We can't ship that instrument with its 8130 anywhere, right? Because it landed in my shop and it got opened. Is that accurate or?
No. Did you
Okay.
perform maintenance on the instrument?
Absolutely not.
Okay. So the approval for return to service is still valid. You haven't done anything to the instrument.
Okay. Because I
In
know
fact,
certain manufacturers, when we receive their instruments and they come into the shop, for instance, if we misordered an instrument and we say, take it back, we don't need it, we made a mistake, whatever, they will charge us to go through the instrument to issue another 8130 because the original 8130 that accompanied the instrument on its way to me is no longer valid.
It's only no longer valid because they don't know what you did with it.
Right. And that's
Okay.
understandable. Yeah.
we have a bad habit in this industry of troubleshooting by replacement. And, and for a shop that, ordered a component, installed it, found out it didn't fix the discrepancy, and then, ships it back to the manufacturer, you have an instrument that's been installed now and could have affected its performance. And so I understand the manufacturers that are there, but it's mostly because of, people using, troubleshooting by replacement rather than troubleshooting.
Right, that makes sense. That makes sense. So, may I ask you a few questions about electronic and digital record keeping?
Sure.
Okay. So, as you know, we have OpSpec A025, which gives us the ability to maintain our records electronically, and we do so entirely. We are an entirely paperless shop. We don't maintain any paper records on any aircraft. It's all online, with the exception that we weren't granted authority by the FAA to do digital signatures. So when we have to sign something, we have to unfortunately print it out, sign it, and scan it back into the system again, which is a drag, but that's kind of the way it works. And we have actually a plug for our sponsor, ADS. They sell a product called AMI, which is an electronic work management system, and we are a proud user of that system to very good benefit. What do we need to do in order to be able to get digital signatures, or to get away from this interim step that we use of having to print out forms, sign them, and scan them back in? Is there any way that we can go fully electronic with respect to our signatures?
The short answer is yes.
Okay.
All you have to do is notify the FAA.
Notify.
Yeah. If you read ACE 120-78 alpha, the requirement is that you notify the FAA, you tell them how you're doing it, you're telling them what you're doing, and everything else. There's actually a public law that prohibits the FAA from prohibiting you from using electronic signatures. The law specifically says, notwithstanding any statute, regulation, or other rule of law other than this title and Title II, with respect to any transaction in or affecting interstate or foreign commerce, a signature, contract, or other record related to such transaction may not be denied legal effect, validity, or enforceability solely because it's an electronic form, and a contract relating to such transaction may not be denied legal effect, validity, or enforcement solely because an electronic signature or electronic record was used in this information. Subsequent to that, or in conjunction with that, there's this thing called the Uniform Electronic Transaction Act, which defines what electronic signature is. And so what I would say is, as long as the approach that you're choosing to use conforms to the Uniform Electronic Transaction Act, okay, all you need to do is, under AC 120-78, explain how you're going to do it, as in what your repair station manual has for electronic signature, and you can do that.
Wow. Okay. Because when we originally got certified a few years ago, that was the topic of a very long, involved discussion and admonition from the FAA that they weren't comfortable with it. And, I know that a lot of shops struggle with this. I've spoken to some shop owners who do have electronic. It seems to be very much up to the caprice of the individual inspector as to whether that thing's going to get approved or allowed or not. But you're saying no, anybody can get it.
Well, the challenge you had is that, and arguably, probably the last 5 years has seen exponential development of uh, signature security systems. Okay, and the AC, the people read the AC as if the FAA is giving us permission to do this. The FAA is not giving us permission to do this. The law is giving us permission to do this. And the law prohibits the FAA from prohibiting us from doing it. However, the FAA does have a responsibility to be aware that we're using it and that we have some resemblance of security that goes with it. Now, the argument is that, oh well, but anybody could falsify an electronic signature. Well, I got news for you. Anybody could falsify a paper signature as well. So that's not a good argument.
Yeah.
But I will say that 10 years ago, we didn't have a lot of tools in the toolbox for electronic signatures. In fact, many of the programs, and I believe AMI is one of those, that actually requires the individual to sign into the program with their security access. And when they fill out the paperwork, it is tracked back to them specifically.
That's
and
true.
I would suspect that AMI, in fact, conforms to the Uniform Electronic Transaction Act. If that is all valid, then that's the information you give the FAA under 120-78 when you inform them that you're going to begin using electronic signatures.
Okay, so let me back up and ask then. So for OPSPEC Alpha 025, which is this electronic record keeping, seems like you need to have that issued by the FAA to even start with electronic records. Is that the case, or are you saying no, you're allowed to do it without the OPSPEC?
Well, that is a very long and convoluted conversation. So the language of A025 is such that it implies permission.
Yeah.
Okay. The permission is contrary to law. Okay. This is a conversation I have in Washington on a regular basis. I can tell you, you will most likely see changes in A025 in the not too terribly distant future. Okay. But the reality is that, again, if you look at the AC and look at the procedures for notifying the FAA of an electronic signature, which they are supposed to document on A025, it's pretty straightforward, and it's simply what system are you using. To be honest, I don't disagree with a little bit of oversight, because there is a little bit more to establishing a traceable electronic signature than simply typing your name on an email, right? And so there is a little bit more to it. Using an established program, when we first went to electronic 337s, which, by the way, that is the preferred way of doing 337s, is electronic. The electronic mandates electronic signature. And so I should be issued 025 automatically because I'm required to use electronic signature for the FAA form. It's just this, people haven't peeled the onion on this one. But when we first did the electronic 337, I think there was one vendor. It was I don't know, $50 a year, $49 a year to have for every signature, and we're so far beyond that. You know, and honestly, the pandemic forced a lot of people to go into electronic contracts and record keeping and banking and everything else, and so we have a myriad of capabilities today that we simply didn't have when you started your repair station. So just because you got a one and done on this one, I would cite that you're complying with the Uniform Electronic Transaction Act, and this is how I'm doing it. And it needs to be in your repair station manual. Okay. And when the revision to your repair station manual has been implemented, they should issue you 025 for signatures.
Okay. Well, you say 025 for signatures. There's already, I have 025. There's no additional 025, right?
No, but
Okay.
most likely it says,
Yeah,
and
there
it
is a
doesn't,
limitation on it. They say you can use it for record keeping, you can't use it for signatures.
right. And so what they'll do is they'll revise that so you can use it for signatures. But
Okay.
like I said, legally, and you need to stand your ground. Legally, they can't prohibit you under these two laws.
Okay, great. Well, I'm sure I'll be reaching out for some assistance with this as I get into this discussion with the guys over at the FISDO. But one more thing, you brought up electronic 337s. I was told by someone who tried to get electronic 337s working that it was not, it doesn't work. And there was an experiment and it failed. And they filed, and I filed paper 337s and have always done so. You're saying that that's actually a working system now?
It is not. Um, they so there is an initiative within the agency to redo the electronic forms, to do the form system, and as a result of that, the 337 went back to paper. This is about 2 years ago,
Okay.
and it was supposed to be done yesterday. And every time I ask them, they say, yeah, it was supposed to be done yesterday, and we're still working on it.
Okay.
So, yeah,
So stick with paper for the foreseeable future anyway. So,
until we can log into it electronically.
all right. Well, this is great, Rick. I'm looking forward to rewriting my manuals and streamlining and getting rid of some of the bulk and getting that over the FAA for their acceptance, not approval. And,
Why do you submit it to them for acceptance?
am I mistaken? Isn't that one of the regulations that they have to accept the repair station manual?
No, not at all.
Okay, well, it could be because section 13 of my repair station manual tells me that I have to send it to them for acceptance, which could be a mistake in and of itself.
It is. You have empowered them to do something that they are not regulatorily authorized to do.
Okay.
The requirement is that your revision is approved by you, the accountable manager, and implemented as prescribed in your repair station manual. Okay. You are to notify them of revisions to your manual. Okay. If your revision does not conform to the regulations, it is not acceptable to the administrator, in which case you will have to revise your revision. But they have no obligation to actually, quote, explicitly accept your document, except when you are initially applying for repair station certificate, in
Actually,
which case.
I think you're right. I think my section 13 does say that I'm supposed to just give it to them and deem it done. Having sent it to them, it's considered accepted, right?
Right, unless notified otherwise.
Right, right.
What we teach in the 145 class is that depending on your repair station, the size, complexity, and staffing. You may implement a change somewhere between immediately or 2 weeks, depending on your comfort level with regulations, but you're not submitting something and then waiting forever until your inspector gets back from training, accident investigation, certification of new facilities,
Right.
vacation, and everything else that takes them out of the office, right?
Right. Makes perfect sense. All right. Well, thanks. This is great. There's a lot of good information here, and I'm sure I will be coming up with additional questions as I do this rewrite and move myself towards greater efficiency. So thanks as always, Rick. It's very helpful.
Absolutely, Brian. Glad to be here to help.
Hey, Brian and Rick, a great conversation. Thanks so much. It's going to be, I think, a must listen by so many AEA members, and just covered a lot of ground, and it'll be very helpful in the continuing education and professional development for all avionics professionals. And I appreciate your time, and thanks so much for joining us. I do want to also remind our listeners that AEA does have several upcoming avionics training courses that are available over the next several months at AEA headquarters in Lee Summit, Missouri. There are also classes available online that you can take. But I also might mention that there are 2 brand new courses that were recently announced. So seating is limited for those in-person classes. You can check out the entire course schedule, the descriptions for each class, and you can enroll today at aea.net/training. And of course, the AEA regionals are set for later this year. There are 6 of them, including 3 in the United States and 3 that are international, 1 in Europe, 1 in Canada, and 1 in the South Pacific region. Registration and hotel information for all 6 of those AEA regionals, all of that is now available at aea.net/regionals. So you can check all of the information out at that website. And then finally, don't forget about the AEA Jobs Board. There have been a lot of new career opportunities and jobs posted here in the last days and weeks, and they're available at locations throughout the entire country and throughout the world. So be sure to explore where you might land next at aea.net/jobs. And that is going to wrap it up for today's show. We hope you can join us again soon for another episode of AEA Amplified, sponsored by Aviation Design and Supply. To learn more about ADS and its full range of products and services, visit aviationdesignandsupply.com. Thanks again to Brian Yablon and Rick Peri for Shop Talk today. And until next time here on AEA Amplified, for our producer engineer Aaron Ward, this is your host, Jeff Hill, wishing you blue skies ahead. So long, everybody.